Welcome to your next home. This is the perfect room if you're looking to expand the family. It's perfect. There's a kid's room or a playroom.
Did you say playroom?
Yeah, playroom.
I've been very bad.
You know what, let me give you a moment. I'm gonna feed the pancake.
Yeah, you go feed the...
Good evening and welcome to episode 56 of the Private Property Podcast. I'm your host, Zama. And of course, it's the Tuesday edition of the Private Property Podcast. And I must say that I'm quite excited for this one. We're having minor technical issues, and I'm sure that one of my colleagues is going to deal with it shortly. I'm sure you can see me smiling. I'm hearing music everywhere, and I know my guest is also hearing music, so I hope that is going to resolve that shortly. Otherwise, it's going to be quite a challenge for us to do this one, so I do hope that we'll be able to fix that one shortly. We have going to be looking at real estate sales during and post lockdown. And this is something that's going to be such an important thing, certainly for us to explore right now. I think we actually need to find a way to fix this particular problem, because I can see my guest this evening, Adrian, Goslett, who's the regional director and CEO of Remix Southern Africa. He's pulling a face, and I know the only reason why he's pulling a face is because this is quite a challenging thing to do properly. So I think my colleague is just going to, I think we're going to go on a quick break and fix it before we start, because otherwise I think the connection might also just be bad for you at home. So we're just going to go for a quick break, then come back with this evening's topic. Of course, if you've got any questions or comments, do send them through. We'll, of course, be exploring what real estate sales are looking like right now during lockdown. We're still seeing people, of course, being able to buy houses. We're going to look at some of the trends that, Adrian has picked up, and also we're essentially also expected post-lockdown. Later on, of course, we will be looking at the competition that we're running. We'll be giving away 5,000 rand to that one lucky viewer And if you, of course, didn't enter the 100,000 rand competition, which it was open a few weeks ago, then there's a competition that you're able to enter, and that is to stand a chance of winning one of two 1,000 rand cash prizes. And all you have to do to get that prize is to share with us what your property dreams, goals, and aspirations are. We're going to go for a quick break before we start. We're going to come back. I hope that we respect some of these gremlins in our system and start our conversation this evening with Adrian. We'll be back just after this. To get that prize is to show dreams, goals, and when we were still alive. Two, three, four, five.
2, 3, 4, 5. Okay.
I'm your host, Zama. We're on episode 56 of the Private Property Podcast. We do apologize for those minor gremlins in our system. It is, of course, the Tuesday edition of the Private Property Podcast. And this evening's topic is quite an interesting one. I think we're living through a global pandemic. So many of us have quite a number of questions when it comes to whether this is the right time to be buying, to be selling, which spaces or which, where should we be buying and selling, the properties that we're in, where are good investment nodes to be investing in. And this evening, we really will be looking at real estate sales during and post-lockdown to help us better understand, what we're currently facing, but also how we can prepare as the economy slowly opens up. This evening, I'm joined by Adrian Goslett, who is the Regional Director and CEO of Remix Southern Africa. Good evening, Adrian. Thank you so much for joining us this evening.
Hi, Zama. Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
So I think, one of the big questions that certainly a lot of our viewers, and of course, if you're watching us at home, you're probably watching whether it's on Facebook, on Twitter, or YouTube, do send through any of those questions that you have about buying and selling during this particular period. And, Adrian, one of the questions that we get asked quite often, and guests want us to ask almost every single, viewers at home want us to ask, almost every guest that we have on, is whether right now is the right time to buy. We're certainly seeing that we're facing historically low interest rates, and a lot of consumers are thinking, well, I now finally, qualify for that, let's say, 1 million rand property. Is it necessarily the right time to be buying right now? If somebody asks you that question, how would you go about answering it in the best way possible, understanding that we're not even at the peak of this crisis, whether it's from a health perspective and certainly even from an economic perspective?
Sure. Yeah, it's an interesting question and one I obviously get asked a lot. And here's the thing. When you ask a real estate agent the question, is it the right time to buy? They always tell you now is the right time to buy.
Yeah.
However, I can honestly say that this is probably the best time to get into the market. You said it earlier, the interest rates are at a 50-year low. From a property perspective, from a purchaser's perspective, a buyer's point of view, it's probably the best market it's been in 35 years from a negotiating standpoint, because let's face it, there is going to be a
lot of stock,
downward pressure on price. So is it a good time to buy? It's almost like a home run question at the moment. Yes, the answer is yes. But I guess it's also a question that's pertinent to the buyer. So it's what do you want for yourself? So I can't answer that question just as a one size fits all. It really is going to determine on your personal position. For example, if you were renting up until now, you might find it a bit more favorable to get into home ownership as opposed to rentals, because up until now, for some and for many, in fact, it's just been unaffordable, and you haven't been able to even get a foot in or a look in.
And I think, it's certainly something that I like echoing to people, that you want to first just look at what your strategy has been, and look at your finances from a very holistic perspective. So in the event where, for example, you have quite a lot of debt, this is also a really good time to be paying off that debt as much as possible. So not adding another payment that's going to go off. And of course, we also know that there's so many other costs associated with home ownership. So it isn't just that one line item, which is the bond amount. So it's important to take a very holistic view in terms of your finances when you make that decision. I think for many who are already looking to buy, this is probably a really good time for them, because they've more likely than not have been saving up, that money for the deposit or that money for transfer fees, and have already been looking even before lockdown. But if property ownership was not even on your horizon at all, perhaps you had other financial obligations, perhaps you were even investing in other asset classes, now would be a good time to certainly learn as much as you can. And this is part of why we certainly are here at the Private Property Podcast, and even going on privateproperty.co.za, going under the advice section and looking at some of the different tips, tools, and advice that is written on the website to help you make that right financial decision for you. So now that we know that answering should you buy, should you not buy is not quite a black and white answer like so many people would want it to be, Adrian, what do we then need to think about when we're looking at rental sales? Perhaps take us a little bit through some of the trends that you've seen when it comes to sales during this lockdown. What I found very fascinating was, I think it was nearly a month ago, when TPN Credit Bureau took out the data for rental collections. They essentially announced what the top 21 top cities in terms of rental collections in the country were. Stellenbosch came out as number 1, and you saw that, for example, their rental collection was not as affected as other, cities across the country. So you're certainly seeing a particular type of trend when it comes to rental collection and it decreasing. What kind of trends have you been seeing when it comes to, sales during the lockdown period?
So it's probably a little bit too early to say what the trends are. However, I think what would be interesting is to discuss what the trends might look like in the future. So during lockdown, obviously not much happened. I mean, our sales numbers went plummeted in May to 5% of regular values. I mean, effectively, that's like doing no sales. Yeah. So, but from 3rd of June till where we are now, what's today, the 30th of June, we're back already at about 75% of our same number for 2019. So the first question to answer is, are people back in the market? Very much so. So people have definitely come out of their proverbial shell, the home that they may be currently in or the rental place they're currently in, and they're definitely very active in the market, particularly first-time buyers. I spoke to a finance house that we do a lot of our origination through. Their numbers for 2020 for June are higher than they were in 2019. In other words, more people are applying for home loans this year in June than they did last year June, which is phenomenal. And I know some of that is demand from the lockdown, pent-up demand, but it is also exciting. So getting on to trends, I don't have a crystal ball and I don't know what it'll look like, but certainly a large part of the population has managed to figure out this sort of working from home scenario. Now, not everybody is able to. And if you work with your hands and out, there's no way around it. But a lot of people have been able to figure this out. I mean, you're interviewing me from Johannesburg. I'm sitting in Cape Town. Normally we'd be in a studio doing this. So we figured, and this is just one sliver of an industry. So if that's the case, if 60 to 70%, and let's say 50% of a workforce is able to work from home for 50 to 70% of the time, you might see a trend moving away from lock up and go to needing a little bit more elbow room. Because if I'm going to be spending a little bit more time and maybe a lot more time in my home, in the past, it wasn't important to have and I'm in a little study room here. It wouldn't have been important in the past, but now it absolutely is. So I can do something like this and I can operate in my space. Things like, if I want to live by the sea, but my work keeps me in Johannesburg, am I able to have the best of both? Can I buy a property on the North Coast with a little bit of a sea view because the type of work that I do allows me to interact mostly on this basis, whereas now I don't have to spend my Monday to Thursday in Joburg and then come home to the family on a Friday to Sunday. I can spend 3 weeks in a month in my home in KZN, and I'm just using that as a hypothetical example, in KZN, and a week in Joburg. So I think those are going to be very interesting trends in the future.
And it's certainly something that I've also noticed, that as people are searching for their properties, you're finding more people wanting 3 beds instead of 2 beds, and looking at using that 3rd bedroom as a sort of makeshift home office studio, because a lot of us are, I'm literally talking to you from the comfort of my lounge. And if for example, I lived with a family, using the lounge as, a makeshift studio might not work, because obviously, the family must be working. So you want a separate space to be able to do that. So that certainly is a trend. You've spoken a little bit about how sales in June for one of the financial institutions that you originate with have plummeted, and as you were saying, it's probably pent up demand from from May, where we were not able to buy as much. Are you seeing that sellers are more negotiable on their price? Because I think one of the things that we already know we're going to see right now is the market is going to be quite overstocked. There are going to be distressed sellers. And when I look at even markets like I'm in Gauteng, we're already seeing quite a number of properties in the area saying, price reduced. And we're almost tracking the reduction, whether it's a 5%, 10%, if it will go below, for example, to higher than 25%. Are you finding that the sellers themselves are negotiable, firstly, and not just because they're all these buyers, but because they know that they need to sell and sell fast before their property stays on the market for too long, and that even the buyers that we currently have now, we don't know if they're going to still have their jobs in the next month or in the next 2 months, because as we were saying earlier, we haven't even quite felt the economic effects or the full economic effects of this COVID-19 crisis. So in as much as our interest rates are at a historic lows, people who today, as you and I are talking, can qualify for a home loan, have a full-time job, next month, the same time, could very well, be facing retrenchments. So are you finding that sellers have an intimate understanding of that? Because I know they certainly also want to sell their property, offload that property, but also make money, right? Because we always say you make money when you buy, so they try to probably buy as low as possible, and they want to be able to make a little bit after paying off the bond and the estate agent commission and whatnot. So are you seeing that trend right now?
So it's starting to happen now. At the beginning of I don't want to say at the beginning of lockdown, at the beginning of coming out of the level 4 lockdown, so into level 3, sellers were still, and we're still holding on to their prices. I think because everything was still trying to find everybody was still trying to find their own level. Some of the things that have impacted positively versus negatively, and why we don't have as many sellers in distress currently, are things like the interest rate did come down significantly over a period of time. So meaning that those sellers can afford their bond repayments monthly. They haven't necessarily run into arrears yet. Other things that have impacted that is there's been employment relief through businesses, TERS and UIF, etc., has helped to shore up some of the differences for those that maybe were not laid off but had salary reductions and so on. But I think some of our problems economically are still coming. It's still early days. I think come August, September, October, when a lot of that economic relief in the country runs out and businesses start getting affected and they have to make harder decisions, that's when, like you just said, some people might not have this employment security that they thought they had. So a discerning seller should now really be looking at, if they really want to sell, not just floating their house on the market and hoping for the best. If they're really wanting to sell, to list their property at a fair market value. And that fair market value, that is not set by the seller, and it's not even set by the agent. It's set by the market. It's set by what the market is willing to pay. And it's a harsh reality, because where you might have bought a property, you might have done a whole lot of work to it, you fall in love with it because you're emotionally attached to it, but the person buying it doesn't see it the same way as you do. And for them, it's, well, I was once explained this, and maybe this is actually a good analogy for anybody selling and buying for that matter. If I ran a store and I sold croissants, and I had 12 croissants on my stand, and each croissant I sold for R5 each, but one of the croissants on the stand was R6. At the end of the day, which croissant would sell last, if at all? It would be the R6 one, because they all look and taste exactly the same. But the problem with that is tomorrow I make another 11 croissants and I've still got the old one there. Well, that old one, I now have to drop the price. I drop it from 6 to 5 to match the others. And maybe I even drop it from R6 to R4, which is lower than the other freshly baked croissants. But no one wants an old croissant. And that's the problem. It seems like a strange analogy, but it's sort of similar in property. The longer your property is on the market, the less attractive it actually becomes to people, and eventually even regardless of price, unless it really drops low.
Yeah.
So what you want to do at the outset is make sure that you list it at a fair market value. Again, it's not what the agent says and it's not what you think. It's what the market tells you that the properties are worth. And well, then your property will move. So I guess coming back to your original question, Are sellers willing to? Not at the beginning, but I think the discerning seller is starting to understand that if I really want to get my property sold, I best make sure that I market it properly, because my neighbor to my left and my right may also be selling in my street, and I want them to buy my croissant, not those two croissants.
And I actually really love that analogy, because I think one of the things that I've certainly seen even on my own property investment journey is when I look at how long a property has been on the market, a part of it also starts wondering beyond the price point, which you can look at and think, okay, maybe they listed it perhaps 10% higher than other properties in the area. You start wondering what could be wrong with it that it's not moving. So even with the with the croissant analogy, is you end up putting it down to 4, and then the next thing it's 3 rands, and I start thinking, okay, price aside, what's wrong with this croissant, right? Perhaps it's gone off, or whatever the case is. So it certainly is something, especially for those of us who track different areas and you create alerts for the different areas, and you're even able to see when when a particular property moves from one agent to another. It's been with this agent for the past 4-6 months. They haven't been able to sell it, and then the seller finds another agent. And then it's a new listing, but it's the same property, and it still doesn't move. By the time it's on the 3rd and 4th, agent, you already see sometimes that perhaps it's the seller who isn't negotiable in price, and the price point isn't correct. But that aside, you also just start thinking there might be something wrong with this property. It cannot be that it's been sitting on the market for sometimes 12 months, 18 months, sometimes even longer, and it's still not moving. That's certainly something that sellers, I think, needs to be mindful of. We're going to go for a quick break, Adrian. I want to come back. I actually want us to look at tips for both sellers and buyers during this lockdown period and even beyond. Because as we say, there's certainly different trends that we may potentially see as we slowly open up the economy, as we slowly start even rethinking, work and the way that work works and the future of work, and perhaps even some of our needs that we're going to have as customers when we are buying our property. We're going to go for a quick break. Do send through those questions and comments, and we'll be addressing them on the show. And of course, later on in the show, we're going to be giving away that 5,000 Rand cash prize to one lucky winner. You don't want to miss it. We're going to be back just after this. Tips for dealing with the bank. So perhaps you're renting in a property where it is run by a body corporate.
Understanding the basic calculation, income minus expenses, and you want to be left with a positive income.
It is a very tough game. It's not easy at all.
To stay ahead of knowing exactly what your clients need, what their teething issues are.
Have a joint move-in inspection.
That a lot of people that are coming into sectional title homeowners associations are, just like you described, not only first-time homeowners, but first-time owners and residents in community schemes.
They get to see the perspective from the other side of the aisle. And I think that's a really important thing to do.
It's a market that's estimated to be transacting at least 9 billion Rand per year. So it's a huge market.
In order to get there, you need to be able to build up a track record.
Your cash flow model needs to be sharp.
A quote comes to mind. The best time to buy a property was about 10 years ago. The next best time is now.
Welcome back to episode 56 of the Private Property Podcast. I'm your host, Zama. This evening, I'm joined by Adrian Goslett, who is the Regional Director and CEO of Remix Southern Africa. We're looking at real estate sales during and post-lockdown. Of course, we're taking your questions and comments when it comes to this one. Perhaps you still have a question mark about whether this is the right time to buy, where you should be buying, what you should be considering in the event where you're buying. Perhaps you're a seller and you're looking for some tips in selling your property right now. And it might not even be that you're selling because you're distressed. Maybe this is, an asset that you are looking to offload, but wanting to find out what the best tips, tricks, and tools you can use to make sure that you're able to sell that property as efficiently and as quickly as possible. Of course, there's so many uncertainties right now as we're going through the COVID-19 crisis. It's had an effect not just on our health system, but certainly has economic effects as well. We've got a comment here, Adrian. This one is coming in from Bruno DeSantos, who says, I think one should be very careful when buying, although I do agree it's a very good time to buy, but people are saying the virus will be with us for the near future, so job losses will probably increase further, I think. One should be 100% sure of job security before buying. Remember, a bond is 20 to 30 years. Unless you have cash, then you are sorted. And that's, of course, something that we're saying, Adrian, is that you really do need to assess your finances, especially if you're buying a primary residence, because I think the considerations are slightly different if you're buying an investment property, because then one would argue you're going to get tenants in, and that will be a slightly different way of sort of running the numbers. But as soon as you are the person who's going to be living there and have to service all the costs that are related to that property, then it's certainly something that you have to be mindful of. Another comment, this one coming in from Howard Mugetsane, who says sellers need to listen to their reputable agent and avoid dual mandates. Make your property exclusive by pricing it right and sell it with only one agent or agencies. Perhaps I'll comment on that, Adrian, because we, as I was saying earlier, that you sometimes see one property listed with three different, different agencies, and sometimes the price is even different on all those three ads. What tips would you then give to sellers? Because I think some of them might become slightly desperate during this period. What tips would you give them in terms of selling their particular property during this lockdown?
So I think the name was Howard that said that, and he's right. The first thing you do is find yourself a reputable agent. Not just any agent. And I mean, I know I've got a brand sitting here behind me called Remax, but I'm saying don't go for brand first. Find the agent first. If they happen to be at a good brand, well, that's a bonus. But find there's three things, in my opinion, there's three things that people should be looking for in a quality agent, and that a quality agent should be able to display, and that's good, trust, and care. They have to be good at what they do. So, and by asking a few questions and asking for their history and track record, you should easily be able to get that. The number of homes they've sold, the price they've achieved for the homes they've sold, etc. So are they good at what they do? It doesn't help having a nice guy or a nice person to work with, but they can't sell. Two is trust. Is this someone that you can trust? And the only way that you can discern whether there's a person that you can or can't trust is probably by referral. For example, if we were standing around a fire with some friends and having a cool drink or a beer and buying some meat, and you needed an electrician, what do? These days, we don't pick up the yellow pages. We ask our friend, hey, I heard you had an electrician the other day. What were they like? They were good, they were bad, they were expensive, they weren't expensive. Those are your best reference points of people that that have used someone in the past. And if they've delivered good service, that's where you build the trust. And that's where you find whether it's someone that's trustworthy. And the last is care. And you need to discern whether that person cares about you and your family, or just cares about themselves and their pocket and their commission. And again, by asking them some questions, you can easily start unpacking that. Someone who only wants to sell you, if you're a buyer, someone who only wants to sell you their listing and their stock, as opposed to maybe opening it up to other people's and other companies' even stock, maybe not someone you want to be spending a lot of time with, because they're not after your best interests. And similarly from a seller's point of view. So good, trust, care, those are the three things you should look for in an individual. If they happen to work at a brand, that helps, because that has networks and all the other fun stuff that comes with it.
And I think it's certainly something that we're going to look into, as a different topic that you've actually just raised there, Adrian, is that, a good or an agent doesn't necessarily have to come from one of the big agencies, or in the event where you do come from one of the big agencies, it doesn't automatically mean that you're, a good agent. So there's certainly different considerations as a seller that you need to think of before you choose which agent you want to work with, or perhaps from which brand. So I certainly think that that would be an insightful episode for our viewers, where we look at, what are some of the things that you should be looking out for when choosing the agent that you want to work with to sell your particular home. We've got a comment here coming in from YouTube. This one is coming in from Rahiso Clarence, who says, as an intern agent, I'm really learning some sellers are really reluctant to reduce their price. And that's something that we're saying earlier. If in the event, Adrian, where you're dealing with a seller who is reluctant to reduce their price, what kind of tips would you give them in order to come to the right price point, especially at the kind of price point where you know that if we list at this amount, it will sell, relatively quickly, and the owner will still be able to make their money, perhaps not at the percentage that they, projected, but they're not losing out when they price it at that particular amount. What tips would you give or insight would you give to that particular seller?
I'd probably tell them the croissant story. On a serious note, because that is the reality. I once interviewed an agent, and I think a top agent from the US, and I think he described it best. What he said was, the conversation he had with the seller was, Mr. or Mrs. Seller, I just want to let you know that I'm going to be investing in this venture with you. I'm going to be putting my marketing money on the line and spending, whether that's in my social media campaigns, my online digital campaigns. If I do print, so I'm going to be spending a whole lot of money. I'm going to be marketing your home, taking aerial shots and video shots, etc. So for me to do that, I need to know that if I invest in this, I'm going to get a return on it. So in order for me to get a return on it, I need to make sure that this property will be able to sell at a fair market value. And if the seller, after that explanation and you explaining your value proposition, still wants to hold on to a higher than fair market value price, you need to be willing to walk away from it. Because otherwise, you're doing an injustice to yourself and to that seller. Because that property, if overpriced, is going to sit on the market for 4 months, 5 months, 6 months, and longer, and it's going to become the 12th croissant on the stand.
So, I did say before the break that we wanted to look at, tips for both buyers and sellers, and we've been focusing quite a little bit on sellers. What tips would you give to buyers? Because I think there's certainly a lot of people who are either looking at expanding their property portfolio. Some of them are looking to, get their foot into the property ladder and start their property journey. And perhaps they have been saving up. They're certainly watching the Private Property Podcast and learning as much as they can about the home ownership journey. What tips would you give them for buying a property, particularly during this period?
Before you even start looking on the private property website, which is a great place to go to look for property, before you even start there, find out what it is you can afford before you start the journey. So talk to an originator that we use is Header Bond. You can get a pre-qualification. So effectively what they do, if it's just you or you and your spouse that are maybe purchasing the home, they will assess your situation, your job, your salary, your current expenses, etc. Without getting into all the technical details, they will help you, and they will then discern with the banks what you can afford for your current income level. And when you get a pre-qualification certificate, which in fact, I can't say 100%, but it's a 95% chance that you'll be able to afford X Rand value in terms of the bond. That gives you a lot of negotiating power then when going to make an offer on whichever property. So starts with understand what it is that you can afford first, then go onto the website and do your research. Do as much research as possible, search the different suburbs, locations, homes, prices, etc. Again, I want to encourage, I know it sounds as I'm pushing real estate agents, but try and work with a real estate agent where you can, because a lot of the time, these listings don't even make it to the websites because they get sold before they actually, the photos are even taken sometimes. So you might want to talk to a few agents, get your name down so that if a good property comes on the market, they can take you through it, before the masses of people that come through the websites actually see it. Those would be my two biggest tips. One, make sure you know what you can afford, and two, a lot of research, and the best strategy, work with a reputable agent that can help you.
And I absolutely like that, Adrian. I think one of the big things that I even like saying to our viewers is work with a bond originator. Their services are free, and it does give you that peace of mind in knowing what you could potentially qualify for. As you say, it isn't necessarily 100%, but certainly around 95, if not more percent, that if they say you're going to qualify for 1.2 million rand bond, more likely than not, should you get a property that's priced that amount, they'll be able to get you a home loan for that amount. And you don't even necessarily have to use their services. I think one of the big things is you don't need to apply for the bond via them, but you certainly want to use their services to just get a sense of how much do you qualify for, because it does then help you once you start searching, to be searching for properties that are within that bandwidth. Because I think so many times, a lot of people, you might roughly think you qualify for R1 million, when in effect, perhaps you only qualify for 800,000, and you're viewing properties that are in the R1 million band. When you then sign that OTP, only to realize that actually your home loan is going to get declined, or it does get declined, and not because you have a bad credit score, whatever the case is, but it's because it's far above what your affordability is. So really starting with working with a bond originator does make quite a big difference. We've got a question here coming in from YouTube. It's from Uspusiso Khantile, who asks, hi there, is it advisable to own more than one unit in the same estate, keeping all of your eggs in the same basket, or is it better to own in different locations?
So I guess it depends on the estate. I mean, we own a primary home, is the one I'm sitting in at the moment, but we've got 1 or 2 investment homes, and I can tell you 2 of our investment homes are in the same estate, just because it was a good opportunity at the time. It was at a good price, and something that I could foresee would deliver a good return, 1 on rentals and 2 also on the asset value over a period of time. So I don't think it's necessarily a poor strategy to have it in the same estate. But what I did do is I did do my homework on the HOA, the Homeowners Association, and I looked at the financials, and I made sure that everything was up to date and that it was well run. So if you are going to do it, whether it's 1, 2, or 10 properties in an estate, do a lot of the financial checks and balances on the back side of that. Don't just invest. Look, if you're an investor, you're not investing emotionally, right? It's a logical decision you make, not an emotional one. So then follow the logic, go through all the steps and check the finances and check the boxes, because you're not buying it because you fell in love with the environment. You're buying it because it's a financial decision. So make sure you do your homework.
Actually, Adrian actually thinks, I wish somebody had told me that very early on in my property investment journey. There are some properties where I did buy more than one in a particular complex, and hadn't properly or done a thorough check of the financials, and it does come back to bite you. So Adrian is correct in that one. I think, some of these things you learn as you go, and you pick up as much as you can along the way, but you certainly want to make sure that the financials are up to standard. And then in the case where they are, you can buy as many, but I think it's also important to diversify a little bit. I mean, you might have maybe 2 or 3, depending what your appetite for that investment is, and perhaps find other ones. And another is perhaps get into the board of corporate, be one of the trustees. I think that also makes sure that you have a very hands-on approach to taking care of your investment, and certainly something that we've covered when we've had Zelinda van der Merwe right here on the Private Property Podcast. Adrian, we're going to leave it there this evening. Thank you so much for joining us. And I think, some of these tips, I certainly will be using them even in my own property journey. I mean, right now, luckily I'm not selling, but certainly in my buying, as I'm looking at different properties during this period, we are of course seeing some where the prices have gone significantly down. So we'll be using some of the tips and tricks that you've taught us this evening in navigating that home buying journey. Thank you so much, Adrian.
It's a pleasure. And just I can leave you with one line, which someone told me some time ago, that when they were asked the question, when's the right time to buy a property? The answer is always 10 years ago.
Yeah. And we've had quite a number of guests that have actually said that. I think even Miguel Martins from APSA likes echoing that one, that if you look at property, and I share my story that it was nearly a decade ago, I was looking at properties in Midrand, and 2-bed in a really good estate was going for something like 480, I think, but it was certainly under $500,000. And some of them in that very same complex today are going for above 800,000. Some are even in the 1.2 region. So had I bought back then, I would have, done fairly well for myself in terms of my portfolio. But of course, we learn, and it's never too late. If anything, you can start your property journey at any point. So certainly don't let people make you believe that it's too late to start this. It's always the right time, as long as you have the right information, as Adrian has said, and you learn as much as you can before you make that investment decision. We're going to go for a quick break. When we come back, we are giving away that 5,000 Rand prize. You don't want to miss it. Maybe you will be this evening's winner. We'll be back just after this. Tips for dealing with the bank. So perhaps you're renting in a property where it is run by a body corporate.
Understanding the basic calculation, income minus expenses, and you want to be left with a positive income.
It is a very tough game. It's not easy at all.
To stay ahead of knowing exactly what your clients need, what their teething issues are.
Have a joint move-in inspection.
That a lot of people that are coming into sectional title homeowners associations are, just like you described, not only first-time homeowners, but first-time owners and residents in community schemes.
They get to see the perspective from the other side of the aisle. And I think that's a really important thing to do.
It's a market that's estimated to be transacting at least 9 billion Rand per year. So it's a huge market.
In order to get there, you need to be able to build up a track record.
Your cash flow model needs to be sharp.
A quote comes to mind. The best time to buy a property was about 10 years ago. The next best time is now.
Welcome back to episode 56 of the Private Property Podcast. I'm your host, Zama. It is, of course, that time of the evening where we give away 5,000 Rand cash to one lucky viewer at home. And that is, of course, for the viewer who participated in that 100,000 Rand competition that we ran a few weeks ago. We are ready to, get the name going and see who's going to win this evening's 5,000 Rand prize. And of course, the three rules for this competition is that the first is, of course, it was open to the people, or rather is open to the people who entered that 100,000 Rand cash prize. And it also includes the estate agents who entered that competition, as they are not employees of private property. Secondly, one winner will be randomly drawn right here on air during the Private Property Podcast. And lastly, the Private Property team will be getting in touch with the lucky winner that we announce within 24 hours to verify their details. And in the event where we can't reach them, then the prize money is going to roll over to the following day. So I do hope that when the Private Property team gives you a ring, you do pick up and we're able to verify all of your details and you walk away with that 5,000 Rand prize. It's that simple. It really is. So we've already pressed the picker. Of course, that's nearly 46,000 names that have gone into this. And we're going to see who this evening's lucky winner is going to be. I would say I enjoy giving away money. And I enjoyed so much that on Friday, we'll also be giving away 2 1,000 Rand cash prizes. And that is, of course, on our competition, where we want to hear all about your property dreams, goals, and aspirations. All you need to do is share them down below. You can share them on Twitter, on Facebook, on YouTube, whichever platform where you watch the show. And we will pick the 2 lucky winners who will win that 2,000 Rand cash prize. We're about to see who the 5,000 Rand cash prize winner is, and it is Shalom. Shalom, congratulations. You walk away with that 5,000 Rand cash prize. The Private Property team will be in touch with you to verify your details before handing you over that amount. I really do hope that all the winners pick up their phones when you verify their details. It really is that easy, and they'll walk away with that amount. Well, that's it this evening for us on the Private Property Podcast. We're back again tomorrow evening. And of course, as usual, we hope that you are staying home and staying safe. We'll be back tomorrow at 7.
Hi, I'm Julia Chen. I'm a restaurateur living in the Cape Town City Bowl. My restaurant, Hallelujah, is situated right in the heart of the city. Over the last few years, the influx of young professionals has created so many new and exciting things to see and do. The rejuvenation of the city has been something really special to experience. There are some really beautiful suburbs in our neighborhood. Nestled below the iconic Table Mountain lies Oranienburg and Tamboerskloof, filled with unique and beautiful homes. There's such a young vibe in the city with an incredible blend of diverse cultures catering to everybody's desire. Within the city, there are so many genuine and passionate people, and you'll find them in places like the Woodstock Exchange, offering everything from handcrafted works of art to a culinary experience hard to forget. For those who enjoy the outdoors, Lion's Head and Table Mountain are phenomenal places to explore. Living in the City Bowl has definitely given me my dream lifestyle, and this is my neighborhood.
Welcome to your next home. This is the perfect room if you're looking to expand the family. It's perfect. There's a kid's room or a playroom.
Did you say playroom?
Yeah, playroom.
I've been very bad.
You know what, let me give you a moment. I'm gonna feed the pancake.
Yeah, you go feed the...
Tips for dealing with the bank. So perhaps you're renting in a property where it is run by a body corporate.
Understanding the basic calculation, income minus expenses, and you want to be left with a positive income.
It is a very tough game. It's not easy at all.
To stay ahead of knowing exactly what your clients need, what their teething issues are.
Have a joint move-in inspection.
That a lot of people that are coming into sectional title homeowners associations are, just like you described, not only first-time homeowners, but first-time owners and residents in community schemes.
They get to see the perspective from the other side of the aisle. And I think that's a really important thing to do.
It's a market that's estimated to be transacting at least 9 billion rand per year. So it's a huge market.
In order to get there, you need to be able to build up a track record.
Your cash flow model needs to be sharp.
A quote comes to mind. The best time to buy a property was about 10 years ago. The next best time is now.